It is day 13 of lockdown here in the UK, and since I saw you last, I have been racking my brains for ideas for photography projects that I can do in and around the house. And in this video, I'm going to try my hand at shooting flower portraits using just a few household items. In any photograph that I take, there are always three things that I consider, and those are the subject, the composition, and the light. And we're going to start today with the latter of those, light. And we're going to shoot these flower portraits using window lights, specifically the window behind me. Now, I've chosen this window for two reasons. Firstly, it's at a nice height, it's got a nice window ledge that's a nice height for me to work at. And secondly, and more importantly, it's in the shade. So I'm not going to have a direct sunlight hitting that window. Now, if you can't do that, if you're lucky enough to have a south-facing garden here in the UK and therefore you get light on it at all times, then you could probably wait until an overcast day before you have a crack at these flower portraits. So for this shot, what we're actually going to do is we're going to use the window to backlight our subject. And that means that whatever's outside is also going to appear in the shot. So what we need to do is we need to mask that window. And we're going to use some of this. This is just common or garden household greaseproof paper that we use for baking. And the great thing about this stuff is it is almost kind of translucent. It does allow a light through it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to tape some of this over the window. And that's going to produce a nice backdrop for our flower portrait. So with that greaseproof paper in place, you can see there's quite a lot of reflection, quite a lot of glare coming off of my window ledge. It's quite shiny and it's quite a dark wood stain. And what I don't want to do is have that light bouncing up onto my subject and giving it any kind of weird colour cast. So what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to put down a few sheets of plain white A4 paper. And that should stop any light bouncing up and, like I say, giving that flower a weird kind of brownish tinge to it, a weird colour cast. So with our light source sorted, it's time to turn our attention to our subject. And it is spring here in the Northern Hemisphere at the moment. And that means that there's a few flowers about. Now, up here in the north of England, it's particularly good for these daffodils. And Mrs. Sale is a gardener, for those of you that didn't know. And she has picked me a few different daffodils from our garden. And so these are going to be our subjects for today's photo. Now what I'm shooting today is flower portraits, so I need to be able to stand those flowers up. And what Mrs. Sale has found me is this glass little vase, which I can pop the flower in to get it stand up. What I like about this, what's particularly good about this for this particular task, is it's got quite a small opening. And that means that I can get the flower in place and it's not going to be moving about too much. Now the stem on this daffodil is a little bit too long, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to trim it down so it sits about halfway up that greaseproof paper, maybe a little bit higher. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to wedge it in place using this little green ball. Now this little green ball, soft squishy little ball, is actually my cat Teddy's favourite toy. But it's quite soft, and what I'm going to do is tuck that into the neck of the vase to stop the flower moving around. Now, what I was planning to use was cotton wool, but we don't have any cotton wool, so this is going to have to do. So with my subject all set up, nice and simple, nothing complicated. Now I've got my subject and I've got my light source. So the final thing to think about is composition. But before we get to that, let's talk about the camera that I'm going to use today. So today I'm going to be shooting with my Canon 60, which is my usual camera for landscape photography. It's a full frame DSLR, and on it I have my 24 to 70mm standard zoom lens, and I'm going to be shooting at 70mm. And I'm going to set this up in landscape orientation. I'm going to shoot this in landscape. Now that is so that I can film and you can see exactly what I'm doing. But when it comes to taking the shots for real, I'm going to turn it into portrait orientation. I pop my camera on the tripod, and that's just so that I can fine-tune my composition and get it as close to perfect as possible. I'm shooting at 70mm, and the composition I'm going for is really simple. Just put the flower in the middle of the frame, and then I've moved the centre of the flower up the frame slightly so that I include a little bit of the stem coming up from the bottom. Now I focus manually on the part right at the centre of the flower. I think from my biology A level that was called the stigma. I'm shooting at f16 because I want to try and get as much depth of field as I possibly can without getting too soft. If I go too far, if I go to f22 for example, that's actually going to produce a slightly soft shot. So f16 is as far as I'm prepared to go. And at that focal length, at that distance, focusing distance, and that f-stop, that's going to give me a depth of field of somewhere in the region of a centimetre. So hopefully that's going to allow me to get the petals around the outside of the stigma almost kind of acceptably sharp. Now at ISO 100 and f16, that means to properly expose this image I need to be shooting at around 1/10 of a second, and that's pushing things as far to the right and getting my highlights as bright as I possibly can without clipping them. And doing that, I've now noticed that the centre of the flower is actually quite dark. And so what I want to do is try and get a little bit of light in there. And to do that, I'm going to use this. It's a reflector. And it's got two sides. It's got white on one side and it has silver on the other. And it's the silver side I'm going to use because that is the one that reflects the most amount of light. Now, if you don't have a reflector like this, you could just use a bit of tin foil, a bit of kitchen foil, and use that to bounce some light into the center of the frame. And that could make just a little bit of difference, just to make the shot just a little bit more professional, shall we say? Now that's really as far as I want to take this shot, so all that's really left for me to do is to go ahead and take the shot using the 2-second timer. I'll then double check the sharpness, make sure everything's okay, and if it is, if I'm happy with it, then I'll flip the camera into portrait orientation and I'll take the shot for real. I've uploaded that image now onto the computer just to check it out, and it looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. It isn't going to win any awards for sharpness. It is a little bit soft, particularly around those inner petals, but it's totally usable. It's totally fine. You can't really tell from a distance. It's only when you start sort of pixel peeping that you can pick up on that. So yeah, pretty pleased with it. One of the really nice things about this is because it's backlit, you do get quite a lot of detail in the petals that you wouldn't otherwise get. So that looks really nice as well. So here's the final image, along with a few others that I've also taken today.
I lose my breath whenever I see you. You stole my heart, what is it that you do? My life was great till you added colors. Like the moon needs the sun, we don't care about the others.
So there you go, that's my approach for taking very simple flower portraits. Nice and easy, nothing to it, but I think you'll agree, pretty effective. Now I'll be back later on in the week and we'll be doing some more photography in the house. I don't know what that will be at this stage. Before I go, I do just want to say a big thank you to everybody that sent me their images in response to the last video that I put out on multiplicity selfies. So far I've received nearly 30 images from people, which I'll now upload onto my website, and I'll leave a link in the description below so you can go and check those out and you can see what everybody's been doing. And I'm going to do the same thing for this video as well. So if you want to go and take your own flower portrait and then send it to me, as before, I'll upload it over to my website so that everybody else can see it.
You said my words. fire. You're my heart's desire. I just wanna love you, just wanna hold you, just wanna be with you till we grow old.